Chapter 631. To the Ridge. The Wistover Duchy Army, as Dominic was calling them in his mind, as he had forgotten what the official designation for the governor's force was supposed to be, quickly spread out into a spear wall and advanced on the goblin forces. "What do you say we go show the spearmen how to kill goblins?" Amy suggested. They had rifles, but they were both stronger as mages than physical combatants. It was just practical, right? Dominic winked at her, and then both of them were off and running at an inhuman rate, enhanced by monstrous strength and physical enhancement spells. They raced past the spearmen, ignoring the shouts of the old general, and then both of them drew their pistols. Dominic laughed as he realized that they had both picked the ones with additional fire damage so that they could channel fireball through them, but that gave Dominic an advantage. He could also cast Arcane Blast as he fired, and it would give him a refreshing surge of energy and mana. Not that most of his spells were coming from his own reserves, but it was faster to do it with stored energy than external mana. A marginal increase, but when you were going wild with two pistols, it was noticeable. Colonel Wilkes laughed as he saw the bright orange glow and felt the heat wave from a dozen fireballs exploding in a second. Dominic had run out of patience. That sound was one that he would know anywhere, and if they gave it a few more seconds, there would likely be hand-tossed mortars added to the mix. However, it did sound like he had an assistant. Amy must be with him. "Spearmen, move forward. Don't let them surround the Duke. Even if he's on a suicide run, our duty is to keep him alive and in charge. I swear to all the gods, if you bastards let him get injured, you'll be doing my paperwork for a month." Jack was shouting. The soldiers roared in despair as they tried to chase after the explosive duo. They were mere common soldiers with a level 5 physical enhancement gem. How were they supposed to keep up with those two psychopaths? And didn't one of them have wings? Jack was pretty drunk, but he was reasonably certain that he just saw Dominic vault a hobgoblin to shoot it in the top of the head. Dominic used a flap of his left wing to turn his body, so he could barrage a group of goblins that thought they could flank the battlefield, and then hit a hobgoblin with Arcane Blast to refresh his energy. The creature died in a single hit, and Dominic briefly wondered what level his innate magic was at now. The monster was at level 5, so it should take magic of at least that level to kill it in one shot, even with a lucky hit. Dominic slowed as he got close to the ridgeline that the monsters were coming over. There were still steady flows of monsters coming up the hill, but the hollow wasn't large enough to hold the monsters that they had already seen. There had to be a portal down there, and with this sort of targeted monster group, it was likely not a summoning but a portal to somewhere else. A spot where monsters had been gathered. "Dave, make sure that we've got eyes on the royals. If this is bait, the other Daves might get to fight too." Dominic shouted, knowing that the trolls would hear him from where they were fighting the ogres. His hesitation gave him and Amy time to clear the top of the hill while the spearmen caught up to them. "Are we pushing in?" Jack shouted, trying to make himself heard over the sound of battle.
"No.
There's a portal or summoning array down there, and we can't see it through the trees. Hold position up here, where they don't have a direct line of sight until they're almost up the hill. That's safer, and we will still get through the monsters as fast as they come to us." The old general laughed as he realized the plan. Dominic was just going to farm the enemy, and now he was standing close enough that he could fire artillery into the valley with impunity if things started to get overwhelming. The current influx was almost all goblins, with only a few more ogres coming up the hill. Slowly, the influx ended, and then a single human mage with his hands over his head walked up the hill. "Barriers up. Hold your fire," Dominic ordered. Jack took a long swig of rum and laughed. If anyone was likely to summarily incinerate the man, it was most likely to be Dominic. Why was he giving them the warning when they were all holding spears? Or perhaps he was simply reminding himself. Alistair walked up behind Dominic and stared down at the horrified mage, who was struggling to walk up the hill without lowering his hands from the position of surrender. "We get it already. Just get up the hill, and we will accept your surrender," Jack shouted, impatient to find out where this idiot came from. The mage scrambled up the rest of the distance, struggling through the soft dirt after a constant barrage of fireballs and explosions during the brief battle. The hill had been a grassy slope, now it was a battlefield, all churned earth and craters. The mage bowed formally as he reached the top, and then fell to his knees. Dragon Lord, Mage Lords, I place myself at your mercy, and wish to deliver this letter, he explained. Dominic nodded, and Amy moved forward to take the letter from the mage. She had a better chance at detecting curses and traps spelled onto the paper, but it appeared to be nothing but simple parchment, with an ornate and elegant script written on it, addressed to His Royal Highness, Dominic Wavemates, Duke of Westover, Governor of Stantia Province, rightful King of Wavemates, Emperor of the Trollish Alliance, Bane of Dagos. Chapter 632. Correspondence. Well, that is a mouthful, Amy noted as she read through the front of the folded letter, which was sealed with golden wax, and highly concerning, given the titles that it assigns to him. Alistair added, "How about we open it and see what it's got to say before our guest has a heart attack?" Dominic suggested, "You just like it because it flatters you." Amy joked, "You're not wrong. But if they're offering me a letter, it's only good manners to read it. Whoever wrote it is clearly an educated and literate sort, so sending ogres to harass me doesn't seem logical. They have to know how it would end if they knew I was here. Your Royal Highness, greetings from your most loyal subject, Asmodane, Archmage of Kynwyn Academy, Lord Interrogator of the Wavemates Royal Line. I suspect that you have many questions for me, and I intend to answer none of them. I came today only to congratulate you on your promotion. We have not yet had an opportunity to meet in person, but please accept the gift of one acolyte from my tower as a personal assistant, should you need one. You have my word that he is fully trained and loyal to a fault. The curse ensures that. Soon, the lingering curse of the Dragon King's demise should have faded, and your full birthright will become apparent. I recommend that you don't fight it. Humans are humans, and Dragonkin are Dragonkin. Pretending to be what you are not will do you no favors. P.S. Forgive the monsters, they get dragged through every time a portal is opened between planes. For a few seconds, everyone stared at the message, and then Alistair began to swear profusely. That rat bastard son of a bitch. I know where he's gotten to. We all thought that he was dead, lost during the succession wars, but I should have known better. 1,000 years as the headmaster of the Kynwyn Academy wouldn't end so easily. That pointy-eared thief ducked out of the world entirely to go hide in the beast realms. That's why when he opened a portal here, monsters came through. And I'm willing to bet that it's happened dozens or hundreds of times in the past. Alistair ranted. Care to explain? Very little of that made sense to me. Right, you're still young. All right, where do I start? With the bit about 1,000-year-old dragon. Jack offered helpfully. Yes, that's a good spot. All right, let's start with that. The reason that nobody knows anything about the past, despite coming from ancient civilizations, is because of that asshole. A little over 500 years ago, Asmodane, or Ezra as he was known then, decided that it would be wise to either steal or destroy every single historical book known to reference the Dragon Wars, or the pacts between the Dragon Kings, the Giants, and the Trolls. Nobody currently living knows why he did it, but he either looted or burned nearly 15,000 libraries and made himself a wanted criminal in nearly every nation on every continent of the world. He destroyed so much historical knowledge and so many magical artifacts that he nearly plunged the entire world into a dark age. Then, he simply disappeared until 200 years ago when he was found to be living as the headmaster of the Kynwyn Academy. Naturally, the older generation, the ones who lived through the aftermath of his crimes, were livid and wanted him prosecuted. However, the Dragon King protected him and claimed that there was no proof Asmodane was Ezra. So, while there were protests and calls for prosecution for the next 100 years, nothing really came of it. Only when the previous Dragon King passed and his sons fought for the succession did Asmodane make himself visible again. He backed the last Dragon King for the throne, and with his assistance, the entire political situation was turned around. But that is where things get murky. You see, it was believed that he sacrificed himself in the final battle, a noble act to ensure that his choice for the throne lived to ascend. Clearly, that was not the case. But now, it brings so many other events into question. Are all the people we assumed dead actually dead? Or did an ancient dragon pull them into another plane using a dimensional compass? He invented those, by the way. The modern design, that is. First off, he congratulated you as the governor of Stantia province, so he is up to date on current events. He also called you the rightful king of Wavemates, which is a whole other can of worms, and then followed it up with the title Emperor of the Trollish Alliance, which was the alliance between the Dragonkin, the Trolls, and the Giants. It hasn't existed for hundreds of years. The problem with that is that the reason it hasn't existed is that the leadership vanished. You see where I'm going with this? Dominic nodded. A dragon, who has been causing trouble for 1,000 years, just happens to be on another world, which causes monsters to appear in our world when he opens portals. Coincidentally, he was a leader of an interspecies alliance whose leaders also vanished about the same time. And there have been regular monster appearances all over the region ever since. I can see how that might be considered suspicious. Jack smiled at Dominic, his eyes suspiciously sharp for the amount that he'd had to drink. Not going to touch that part about him calling you an emperor or the rightful king of Wavemates, Dominic shrugged. I believe that the official position is that there currently isn't a Wavemates nation to inherit. Should that change, I am quite certain the monarchs we left watching the joust will be certain to inform us. The old man laughed, then shook his head. That's not a particularly compelling argument when you're standing there with your wings out and a gun in each hand. But I see your point. Starting a civil war when half the country is flooded is just as dumb here as it is on the Dago side of the border. Now, what do we do about this random mage? Chapter 633. An Acolyte to Help. The newly arrived mage simply shrugged. I am an acolyte from the Kainwen Academy's branch location in the Beast Realm. I am trained in magical theory, spellcrafting, accounting, and political theory. At this point, you likely know as much as I do. I was simply grabbed from class, told that I had to deliver a letter before taking up a new assignment, and to try not to get shot. I didn't even know what that meant until I saw the weapon in your hands. Dominic frowned. I don't suppose that you angered someone, did you? The mage shrugged. Probably not. I'm just an acolyte. I mean, yeah, I failed a few classes here and there, but not enough that it should have upset anyone in power. It's not like I am totally useless. I am exceptionally skilled at spellcrafting and magical theory, and I did pass accounting. Dominic laughed. I already have a steward, so you don't need to worry too much about the accounting part. The other two aspects will be more important, given how Wistover is developing and the fact that your former employer insists that you are supposedly loyal to a fault. The acolyte laughed. Don't you use the life bond curse here? If I betray the Wavemates lineage or the academy, I will actually die. As in, no chance for resurrection. Dead. Dominic shook his head. It's not a common practice here. Though if you are sworn both to Wavemates and your academy, we should be on good terms. I am the last of the Wavemates royals left in this world, as far as I know. The mage nodded, then looked behind Dominic to where Alexis was approaching with the Daves and her royal guard. If that is true, then you don't need to worry about an inheritance battle, I suppose. I will have to ask you about the current situation later. Alexis arrived at the scene and gave Dominic a look that clearly said, explain in 10 words or fewer. So, he handed her the letter. There was a short pause as she read, then frowned in dismay and looked at the mage standing in front of them. Why should we believe that you are not a spy or a threat sent here to infiltrate Wistover? She asked. For a moment, the mage hesitated, until Dominic laughed. There's no point in lying to her. She sees through it every time. Just come out with it, and you're unlikely to die for the truth. The mage shrugged. I can't say that I'm not a spy. If the headmaster requests an update, I will give it to him. But I am unable to betray the Wavemates lineage. It's a spell that all acolytes of my academy are put under. Alexis wasn't sure what to do with that information. She had expected him to gloss over most of the truth, instead of lying outright. Why did you swear to the Wavemates royal lineage? Wavemates as a nation is gone, and has been for a decade, since you were a small child. They still govern my region in the Beast Realm. Dominic realized that he was actually terrible at interrogating strangers. He hadn't thought to ask any of the important questions at all. And is their goal to bring the Wavemates lineage back into power here? Alexis asked.
No.
The Academy isn't concerned with politics on that level. As long as the lineage survives, there will always be royal dragonkin. There is no need to make them rulers of every place that they live. Not when their abilities will bring them to the forefront of society in a generation or two. Anyhow, when you live as long as a dragonkin, there isn't any need to rush things. 3 human kings might pass through their reign before a single dragonkin becomes an old man. So, it's easy enough to arrange to have one of his children marry into a royal family to continue the lineage if that's what he desires. Personally, I think it's overrated. Who wants to rule over kingdoms full of humans who are just going to whine about everything and then die before you have time to resolve the problems they were upset about? Alexis smiled at the man's academic annoyance. His tone suggested that he hadn't experienced the situation from a life or death point of view, only that of an outside researcher. But it also left them with one more question. Are you dragonkin then? The mage shook his head. No, I'm a quarter troll. I'll likely live close to 200 years, not as long as the prince here, but longer than most humans unless they're strongly magical. So, you fully expect to outlive me and most of the people present then. It makes sense why you take the long view of things. The mage smiled. I wouldn't say that. You're still young, and your magic is powerful. You've likely got half a century on me, at the very least. Trollish regeneration makes me look younger than I am. But there are a few here who will certainly live longer than me. The Dave Trolls, for certain. The shapeshifter and the old drunkard. Dominic laughed, while Jack shrugged. How do you figure that Jack is going to live longer than you? The old man was clearly on his last legs, nearing a state that most would call geriatric. Add his alcoholism to that, and it was a miracle his liver and heart hadn't failed him yet. Can't you feel it? He's been cursed with vampirism. If he dies, he's just going to rise again the next morning. Jack frowned as he downed rum like it was water. Damn it, I knew that nothing good could come of a little bit of strange in a coven house, he muttered. Dominic gave the man an impressed look. It took some seriously bad decision-making to let an undead woman take you home to her family, but to do it before you truly knew her, and to bed her in her family's home? Old Jack had done some things that few would live to tell about. Chapter 634. Jack makes questionable choices. Jack shrugged as everyone turned to stare at him. What? It was before I was married. I figured if I hadn't turned by the end of the year, then that scar on my shoulder was just one more battle scar to go with the rest of them. You let her mark you? I can't tell if that is hilarious, or if your wife is going to murder you when she finds out. The acolyte noted. The missus passed a few years ago. The swamp fever. But I've got great-grandchildren running around already. It's fine if I end up out there somewhere as a vampire's decrepit thrall. The acolyte smiled. You've got some experiences coming to you, good sir. And vampires don't stay in the state they died at. They regenerate to a more optimal level. That's why you rarely see undead children. However, I don't think that was what the Duchess was concerned about. You are the Duchess, right? The Wavemate's prince's wife. I wasn't provided many details before I was sent, but his titles were in a letter. Alexis nodded. I am. And a princess of the Signian kingdom. Not close to the line of inheritance, if that's what you're wondering. But we are equally matched in status. Though I see you're a royal paladin, so there is still a chance to advance. With most power couples like the two of you, the sky is the limit. Dominic winked at his wife. I like this guy's attitude. I see how it is now. You like him because he tells you what you want to hear. However, I have more reservations about fully trusting someone who is sent here by an unknown sorcerer from another world, using a method that just conveniently happens to summon monsters to the location before he arrives. The acolyte nodded at Dominic. She has a strong argument for her position. Dominic just shrugged. She's smarter than I am anyhow. It's not surprising that she's right. Still, I don't think that it's entirely wrong to trust someone who has a life curse on them. We can verify that easily enough, even if we can't get the details of it. We've tortured enough people that triggering the curse is an art form at this point. I trust my judgment to tell me that you're not lying about the fact that it will kill you if you betray. But we're still a bit confused as to why your headmaster Asmodane would even bother to send me an assistant. We've never met before, and from what I know, he's been gone for centuries. living in another world. It's not as if we're particularly close. The acolyte raised his hand. I can answer that. He is, or was, particularly close with the previous Dragon King. I am unclear on whether the man is actually dead. All the official information says that he is, but the situation surrounding his death doesn't make any sense, even for a pacifist. But before that, the headmaster was loyal to the royal family for generations. Before he was exiled the first time, he was a general in the Alliance army, leading trolls and giants into battle all over the continent. I believe that he would support Prince Dominic just on general principle, as the last of the beast-blooded royals left on this continent. Seeing the old bloodlines continue is a priority for him, I believe. Alexis frowned. Is there a chance that he is from the Wavemate's lineage himself? The acolyte shook his head.
No.
He is a pure-blooded dragon, and not a world dragon. He's got some affinity for the family, but they're not directly related to him that I know of, unless one of his ancestors married in. And he destroyed all the information that could have told anyone whether that was actually the case. Jack added.
Exactly.
He doesn't claim to be a prince or any sort of royal, though. He is simply the headmaster of the academy, and has been for centuries. Dominic turned to Alexis for a decision. If she wanted this odd acolyte tossed in the jailhouse, he would go along with it. All right, come with us. We will sort out why there are monsters arriving 2 hours before your portal, and then you can start work. I am certain that Julio will appreciate a trained assistant for the accounts receivable department. Advisor Jenna will be overjoyed as well. She's been complaining about the lack of staff in the department since she arrived, you see. Dominic has just been appointed as governor, and the number of staff needed are skyrocketing. I hope that you passed your accounting classes because you're going to need them, even if you try to focus on whatever other skills you were sent for. The acolyte sighed. In that case, I will be in your care, Duchess. You may assign me an employee name, or you can use my acolyte code name, Gordy. Gordy is easy enough to remember. If I had to rename everyone, I would run out of them far too quickly. Alexis agreed. That made the maids laugh. They operated mostly namelessly in their duties. The whole point of their uniform and position was that they were faceless and anonymous servants that could follow behind their mistress without attracting any attention. Using their names in public would only draw attention to the fact that they were exchanging places regularly. I am also trained in all sorts of magic, including the creation of new spells and devices. Gordy offered hopefully, desperate to avoid being stuck in accounting. Oh, that is wonderful. We will have the elders of one of the mage towers here in town come speak with you. Perhaps you can find some time to tutor the Duke and help him make new spell gems. You have a few busy months ahead of you, but I assure you that they will calm down once we have a full and proper staff hired for the governorship, as we have for the duchy's internal affairs. Alexis assured him. Best to quit while you're ahead. If you have other hidden talents, you should probably save them for after your official job assignment is finished, or you'll just earn yourself more work. Jack warned. Thank you, advisor. I will keep that in mind. Chapter 635. How to Advance. Jack Merlot surveyed the battlefield, where the soldiers were checking bodies to ensure that none of the goblins survived the assault, and sighed. I suppose that we should go back to our seats before someone truly misses us. The lads got their outing, and they've made a bit of coin to supplement their wages, so they shouldn't mind doing the rest of the cleanup.
He suggested.
Dominic nodded. Good point. They will miss us if I'm gone too long. Just make sure that they don't leave the weapons here. Bring them all back, and we will smelt down the metal for the forges. The monsters are our largest source of base metals these days. It also allowed them to keep making more Magitech items without depleting the entire river of clay. I will open the portal, and we can bring the Duchess back with us. I'm sure that her brothers are missing her by now. Amy suggested. Why do you think I'm out here? Alexis retorted. While that is a valid response, I am sitting behind them, and don't intend to take the fall if we return without you. The acolyte rolled his eyes at the doppelganger. The girl was fearless, or perhaps she held some special position within the duchy that allowed her to backtalk the princess to some extent. Neither was true. She just lacked a filter and had little respect for royal protocol or the trappings of station. Alexis patted the mage on the shoulder. Fear not, I have a dress in the clothing orb. I can make myself presentable for a formal event. Amy smiled up at the taller woman. I would go with a dress and partial armor. Not only would it be more fitting for the situation, it would make your sister and Dave happy. Dave gets quite upset when he sees paladin-type women without armor on. He feels like it's deceptive. Alexis turned to the trolls, who shrugged, then nodded. They had decided to view Alexis as two people in one. Work boss lady in armor and event boss lady in dresses. It was the only way that it made sense for her to not wear her armor outdoors sometimes. Alexis wasn't quite sure how that would work with ladies' fashion. There was a version of it that she wore to meetings, though. Military formal for men and women was rather different. However, she did have a layered skirt that went with her full armor. It wasn't a dress, just the skirt that attached under her chest plate. But it gave her a mix of formal and military fashion that worked well in meetings. Amy, fix my hair, will you? I am sure you had a spell for that. Alexis took off her helmet, and the mage waved her hand, arranging long blonde locks into a braided work of art. There you go. My apologies to the staff who has to take that back out again later. Then she opened the portal back to the arena, outside the main entrance this time, so that the crowd would see them coming back in. That would let the audience think that Dominic had left to go pick up Alexis, and not to join a fight. Lord Dominic, you might want to freshen up as well. At least change shirts, so you're not returning with your hair matted and your shirt sweaty. Some might get the wrong idea. Gordy informed him. Dominic smirked, and Alexis smacked him on the back of the head. Listen to your advisor. The sober one. Because Jack had no problem with letting people misunderstand. It was easier to let them think that you had stepped out for an intimate moment than to question what you had actually been up to. Unfortunately, he now had to make himself presentable again if he was going to return, so it would be easier if he just stayed with the soldiers and missed the rest of the day's preliminary rounds. Go, have fun with the royals. I will keep an eye on the lads here. They're not pure green, but they're still fresh to Westover, and we've not fully broken them in yet. The soldiers weren't sure that they liked the sound of that. They were all veterans of the war, but it was starting to look like life in Westover might not be all that much different. They might not be targeted by the monsters, but clearly there were more than enough around to keep everyone on their toes, and then they would be dispatched all over the province to help with everyone else's monster and crime issues. It certainly wasn't looking like an easy assignment, but it should be one that would allow them to make their names known to the local nobility, at least for the officers. And that would help their careers and their families' business opportunities in the future. The only thing worse than being known as being bad at your job was not being known at all, and this far from the capital, that was a real danger. Getting to know the advisor would be the first step to getting to know the Duke. Once they knew the Duke, they stood a real chance of being assigned missions by name and not based on an availability roster. The new regiment had a provisional commander, but that was likely to change in the near future based on who earned the Duke's trust or proved themselves in combat. When they arrived, they thought it might be through impressive reports. They now knew that they were mistaken. At any point during a mission, it was entirely possible that the Duke could simply show up with a gun in both hands and start solving problems directly. That was not the type of noble that they were used to in the capital. But they couldn't count on the Duchess to temper his impulsive nature, either. The reason they were called out today was because she had encountered more trouble than expected while leading a patrol with her royal guard. That wasn't the sort of Duchess that would tone down anyone in their opinion. They were wrong. They just didn't know that Dominic and Amy were both prone to inventing new war crimes when left unattended. Alexis was actually a good influence on Dominic and reminded him that he had responsibilities. Chapter 636, Different Worlds. Dominic cleaned himself up to a presentable standard, also known as dousing himself with a water creation spell, and then putting a clean mage robe on and combing his fingers through his hair. I can't believe that actually works. Gordy muttered. He's got magical hair, and it's entirely unfair. I agree. However, there is hope that our daughters might get the same advantage, and how great would that be for them? One of the longest parts of a noble lady's morning routine is having her hair styled. And heavens forbid that it manage to escape its braid during the night, and you have to remove tangles as well. Alexis added. Dominic nodded. Even worse, it's not a spell.
My hair just does that.
I think that it's connected to my horns. If I wear hats or hoods, they have a habit of coming off at the most inopportune times. Gordy shrugged. I doubt that anyone made a hat that is actually designed to sit on your head, so that might not be magical intervention. That might be true. I've tried everything to get them to stay where I want them, and even if I put them on with a hat pin, I sometimes still have issues. Maybe I'll have to get a hat maker to do something custom for me in the future. You should likely start with the armor, Gordy suggested helpfully, already preparing to find someone who could fill the order. The Duke did go into battle with a chainmail coifon, but that was not a proper substitute for a solid metal helmet. Ironically, he is the armorer. Or his master is. You see, the Duke is a journeyman blacksmith and worked in the royal forges before he was elevated to the dukedom. Not only can he make his own armor, he made what he's wearing and most of our weapons as well. Alexis informed him. That's unexpected. All right, I will put that one to the side. What should I know about where we're going? I heard something about royals. Does the duchy have visitors right now? There is a jousting tournament on to celebrate an alliance of nations signing an accord and trade deal. Currently, all 6 kings are present in Westover for the signing and following events. Is it too late to ask you to find out where I came from and send me back? Amy laughed. Actually, I have a location traced for where you came from. The problem is that none of us actually has the capability to send you there. Interdimensional portals are somewhat beyond our abilities, you see. Any archmage above level 200 should be able to, or certain species with an affinity for it. I know the theory, if that helps. Amy laughed. There isn't a single archmage above level 100 on the continent, much less into the 200s. In fact, you might not find one in the world. However, we do have some who know magic for moving between planes, though normally it's nothing so organized as a portal. Gordy sighed. All right, I will make a note of that. They don't just use a dimensional shift and a compass, do they? Pops can make a dimensional compass if you want to try. Dominic confirmed. Gordy shuddered in horror. Thanks, but no thanks. Amy tapped her non-existent watch and Dominic nodded. All right, time to get a move on. Gordy, you can follow Dave to the manor. Castellan Julio will show you around, and the maids will ensure that you don't get lost. No offense, but it's better that I don't bring you into the joust with us, given that we're sitting right behind the royal booths. The acolyte laughed. I can only imagine the chaos. Thank you for your understanding. Once I realized what was going on here, I was concerned that I might end up in a dungeon somewhere instead of behind a desk doing paperwork. That would have likely been the logical thing to do. But with the veiled maids watching his every move, it was unlikely that he would be able to slip too much past them. Amy finally managed to usher the whole group through the portal, and Alexis accompanied Dominic to the box seats, while her royal guards joined the knights who had gone to fight in the seats behind them. As the day was wearing on, the seats were less crowded than they were at the start of the morning. But it was also getting close to dinner time. So many might have gotten up either to stretch their legs or went home to cook with the intention of coming back. It wasn't like they were charging an entrance fee to the joust. They likely should have, Dominic realized. But this was a major event, so the duchy would cover all the costs, and the local shops would make a killing on the food and drinks. Just an all-around good time. Unfortunately for Dominic, their return had set off Crown Prince Claudius' sister detector, and the prince was coming over to make sure that no harm had befallen the very sister who had spent the entire day trying to avoid being bogged down with royal protocol. At least that did give Princess Eleanor an excuse to come with him, which would keep the prince from getting too annoyed with her for avoiding him. The booth wasn't really large enough for the entire group, so the moment that the prince and the youngest princess arrived, Dominic made his excuses and retreated to go sit a row back with the knights. That put him out of the line of fire, and still gave him an excellent view from a spot where the knights approaching to joust could find him. Perfect timing, Your Grace. There are only 2 more rounds left for the evening, and then the elimination rounds will begin at first light. You made it back just in time, the knight seated to his left whispered. So he didn't manage to buy himself much time. If the jousts were about to end for the night, that meant it was time to head back to the manor and all the formalities of a full royal dinner to celebrate the end of the first day of the tournament. Chapter 637. Prelims over. Fortunately for Dominic, Everyone was in an incredible mood, and all that they wanted to talk about was the joust. Even when they were still watching the last half-dozen contestants, they were already talking about the best matches they had seen so far that day. It was a good sign for Dominic, an indication that there wouldn't be as much of the tense awkwardness that had pervaded the dining room during the negotiations. Our lads really are on their game today. This is a better quality of match than most that I've seen in the last 5 years, and it's only the preliminaries. Alexis noted, talking to her brothers. They truly are. Perhaps having some senior nobles show up at more of the events would improve the quality? It's clear that they're doing their best to impress both their royals and the Duke. Now they're working to impress you as well. Prince Claudius agreed. Alexis laughed. In case you had forgotten, I am actually somewhat famous myself. Nothing to do with my position in the royal family. Prince Russell laughed quietly at the banter between the two siblings. One day, Claudius would accept that he had run out of soft and girly sisters that he could show off for his friends with sons. But today was definitely not that day. The Crown Prince was pointedly ignoring the fact that Princess Eleanor was mimicking the lance movements of the successful knights and taking notes. If he acknowledged it, he would be forced to face the reality that the last of his sisters had fallen to the way of the paladin. The sun had fallen behind the western wall of the arena by the time that the last joust began, and Dominic flicked the lights on, then adjusted the intensity of the magical bulbs. They didn't want to blind the contestants, but they did want the crowd to be able to see them properly. It also made it safer for the beer and wine vendors walking the stands, who were working overtime today, selling out trays nearly as fast as they could reload them. You might as well leave the lights on all night. Is there a timer or something? The knight on Dominic's left asked. No, but there isn't any mana storage other than what's inserted into the lights directly, so I can just put in enough to get them to morning, and they'll shut off on their own unless someone charges them to keep them on.
See, I never thought about that.
I had assumed that there was some safety mechanism so that only certain people had control of the lights. Dominic nodded. There is. The main lighting is controlled by a panel in the service room. But that's a long walk, so I'm not going to go all the way down there to turn them off. The knights chuckled at his laziness when it was obvious that he didn't have to be in the room to activate it. If he did, he couldn't have turned the lights on from his seat. The final pair charged, lowering their lances, and a resounding crash echoed through the building as the lances connected. Both knights rocked back in their saddles, and both lances broke, a draw that would see them both advance to the next round. Now, it was just 2 more lances, and they would be done with the preliminary round. Again the knights charged, and again lances broke against shields. It was an incredible spectacle for the crowd, who were here for the brutality of the whole thing. The final charge of the evening began, and this time only one lance broke. The other slipped up the shield and directly into the visor of the knight's helmet. His head was knocked back into the bracing behind his head, and the knight was knocked flat to his horse, but sat up only a moment later and reined in his mechanical steed. The 2 knights moved to salute the royals before departing, and Dominic laughed quietly as the knight cursed while trying and failing to open his visor. The impact had bent it enough that it wouldn't open without outside assistance. With the matches finished for the day, the King of Signia stood and moved to the referee's stand, where everyone in the arena could see him. Thank you all for attending today. It's been a true pleasure to see how far the Duchy of Westover has come in such a short time, and the devotion of the people to their chosen champions. The matches will resume tomorrow morning, 2 hours after dawn, and I look forward to seeing the gallantry of the knights. Then he waved to the crowd and turned to leave the building. Everyone in the seats behind them was either a soldier or a knight, so they didn't rise immediately. They waited for all the royals to depart the building, and then a bit longer because many found that their legs were a bit wobbly from an entire day of sitting and drinking. Dominic waited as well, with the royals all departing in the company of their royal guards, leaving Alexis and Prince Russell for the last, surrounded by her royal guard. They both stopped to wave to the crowd and got a resounding cheer in return. It looks like this event is a big hit. We're going to have to make it a regular event. Perhaps even twice a year. Alexis whispered. For sure. We will have to work on finding something to keep the stadium busy for at least one weekend every month, likely the holiday weekend. The whole mood in town is improving, And we're only one day into the joust. Alexis nodded. It's been good for the new arrivals as well. It's building some sort of sense of community, even though they all came from different locations within the last few months. Now, should we return home? I have a feeling that Beth is going to make something good for dessert today, and we should check on your new advisor before Jack corrupts him. Chapter 638. Is sobriety needed? She didn't need to have worried much about Gordy. Not only was he behaving, but Alistair had put him to work, and the two mages were currently doing a full upgrade on the magical infrastructure of the outbuildings in the compound. They all had basic magitech in them, mostly from the previous occupants. But now that Alistair had another advisor with him, who had the relevant skills to work alongside him, they could start doing the parts that required two people working together. The fine-tuning of the spells on the hay loft, adjusting the repair spells on the structures, should they be damaged during an attack, and some tweaks to the mechanical warhorses so that they were up to the standards that the two powerful mages considered acceptable. They were decent quality military equipment, despite the hard use. But they were never made to the very highest of artisanal standards. The nation that made them simply didn't have an advanced enough magitech infrastructure for that. So, now that they had a few minutes, as the royals were busy taking over the house with their celebration, Gordy was put directly to work. It would have been in the office, but Jenna had lost the coin flip to Alistair, and she would have to wait for tomorrow morning to get her hands on the newest member of the team. Gordy was not looking forward to it. Now that he knew that the entire governorship had absolutely zero documentation, not even a patrol route, he was much less enthusiastic about taking over the advisory position. Everything was going to have to be created from scratch, and while he knew the theory, most of the practical experience was with the others. However, none of them were as familiar with the layout of the map as Dominic was, and they needed either him or Julio to ensure that they weren't missing anything with the patrols through the duchy. The other nobles they could get documentation from later, as they had the territorial maps, but nothing else. They didn't even have troop numbers for the other regions of Stantia province. Even having some crime statistics, trade volumes, or even a reliable population chart would go a long way to making this all make sense. Gordy had informed advisor Jenna when she had shown him the situation. And that is why Alistair demanded the coin flip. Once you get started on this project, you won't have time for anything else for weeks. The old woman had gleefully informed him. Dominic waved to the mages as he returned to the manor, and then stopped as Tryon came out to greet him and Alexis. Perfect timing. The King of Mitfield is quite drunk, so Beth is adjusting the menu a bit. Something that will be easier on the stomach for nobles who have been drinking on an empty stomach all day. That's not important, though. What I need to know is if you would like a potion for your stomach. I don't know if the Duchess got around to eating today, but as I recall, you had nothing but barbecue skewers and meat pies all day. Dominic raised his hands defensively as Alexis glared at him. Meat pies are a nutritionally complete food. They've got meat, vegetables, bread, and sauce. That's all the food groups. Plus, I only had maybe 8 or 10 of them. I've still got room for dinner. Alexis sighed. Well, it is a festival, I suppose. Thank you, Lady Tryon. I had a proper lunch and then a battlefield snack not long ago. I will be fine without any potions. You don't need to worry too much about Dominic, either. If there is any chance that the food was edible, his stomach should be able to deal with it. Tryon nodded. All right, I will go pass these to the others. The garden witch gave them to me half an hour ago, when I came back from the arena. Thanks for the assistance. Was there anything you were short on? I can have someone run out and get it ready for morning. Dominic offered. I should be good. The veiled maids placed an order for me earlier, and I've already received everything that I needed urgently. The only shortage we're likely to have is wine. Now that you've shown them the good stuff, they're going to drink whatever they can get their hands on, trying to make up for quality with quantity. You might not be aware, but each and every one of them is a capable drunkard. Alexis giggled at the thought of her father as a drunkard. He actually had a protective ward on himself to reduce the effect of toxins, which also affected alcohol, so it was nearly impossible for him to get insensibly drunk. A safety precaution that all the kings had most likely taken at some point before ascending the throne. Leaving yourself vulnerable to poisoning was never a good choice. Tryon nodded in satisfaction, but instead of heading back inside, she turned toward the barn and left without another word. Clearly, She's not in a hurry. Alexis joked. You never really know with her. She might have forgotten that she was going to give the potions to the kings. Or one of them might actually be in the barn. Alexis didn't move, waiting to see where the crazy old techno-witch was off to. It was not a long wait. As soon as he saw her coming, Jack Merlot exited the far side of the barn at a wobbling jog, chased by the ancient techno-witch. She's going to forcibly sober him up, isn't she? Alexis asked nobody in particular. Definitely. I think that the two of them are going to get along famously. Famously, or infamously, could go either way. Still, he did excellent work today. That he did. Despite his age and lack of sobriety, he did a better job of marshalling a group of spearmen who had never worked together before than most generals do with the units who have been under them for years. Chapter 639. Early Departure. Dominic tried not to laugh, as the rather drunk general tried and failed to escape from the techno-witch with her collection of sobriety potions. Instead, he followed Alexis inside to greet the guests. You know, this might be the biggest event that the duchy is ever going to host. 6 monarchs all in one spot hasn't happened in generations. Even for the ascension of a new king, it is usually only the crown princes and perhaps 1 or 2 of the neighboring monarchs who attend. Yet, we've managed to get so many of them here for a mere trade alliance. Alexis noted. Don't jinx it. Things have been going so well. I will be happy if we can get through the tournament without any more major attacks, political maneuvers, or attempted assassinations. Alexis laughed. There aren't many major threats left among the gathered nations, but if you think that there are days without an assassination plot, you greatly misunderstand the nature of being a king. There is always someone plotting to poison the royal family members, to kill one of them off for interfering with a scheme, or simply to put themselves further up the political ladder. How do you think that you found a position as advisor open when you met me? Advisor Morgana was my personal advisor, but one of the king's advisors met with an untimely end while examining a dam construction project, and she was promoted. Dominic sighed. You've likely got a point. Though, I suppose that makes it even more important that we get a properly trained guard for you. The royal guard and the veiled maids should be enough, at least when you're in the duchy. However, I don't really expect that you'll be able to remain here most of the time. The more wealthy we get, the more calls there will be on our time. Not all of them will be within the duchy, and that means traveling. Mostly by portal these days, but if we need to go further than the mages can take us in one hop, it will likely be better to keep taking airships. Alexis nodded. Everyone is starting to upgrade their defenses against portal intrusion these days. Soon, they'll have half the nation locked down, and it will be impossible to portal anywhere but the rural areas. Beside her, Dave snorted with amusement. Took them long enough. Mages coming and going everywhere, and they just let them. Now they get smart and try to stop them, and we all need to start walking, the troll joked. Just wait. Soon we will be able to fly there instead, Dominic countered. Dave's laughter only got stronger. The thought of a whole family of trolls flying was absolutely hilarious to him. There were many things that trolls were good at, flying was not one of them. Trolls did not belong in the air, no matter how you looked at it. They were even heavier than a human or ogre their size, just to remind others that they belonged on the ground. Inside the main hall of the manor, the kings were gathered, socializing, while guards lined the walls, chatting quietly while subtly keeping an eye out for trouble. It was relatively calm, compared to what Dominic knew would be coming tomorrow. Once the first round of eliminations was finished, the winners would be invited to the manor to celebrate, which meant social networking and their chance to impress their king's advisors. They didn't have long before the dinner started, and everyone moved from the social area to the dining room. The atmosphere shifted immediately to one of formal decorum, and the first rounds of dinner were brought out. As suspected, the menu had been adjusted to be easier on the stomach. Things that would be easier to digest when you had been drinking all day and eating stadium snacks. Duke Dominic, join us? The Necromancer King requested as the dinner service ended. Of course, Your Majesty. To what do we owe the honor? The Necromancer King waited for him to be seated, and then brought out a bottle of wine. I'm afraid that I can't remain for the entire tournament. I need to get back home and take care of my responsibilities. So, I wanted a moment to say farewell and to pass you some information that Advisor Tryon has gathered about Stantia Province's history. I will be taking her with me for now, though I suspect that she'll be back sooner or later. She has a particular fondness for this place. Dominic smiled as he accepted the glass of deep red wine. Yes, she has been truly enjoying her time here. I think that it was more like a vacation for her, away from the day-to-day drudgery of being trapped in an office. That made the king laugh. Tryon was never in her office. She simply showed up when she was needed and was nearly impossible to find when she decided that she was not. He had seen more of her since he arrived here than he had in the last 2 years. At least if you measured total time. Normally, he saw her for 10 or 15 minutes a day. But lately, she had been around 12 or 14 hours a day, always somewhere nearby. It's a bit unfortunate that things won't run themselves without oversight, but I see where you are coming from. It's just good governance to review things personally. Dominic added. It's even more troublesome when your whole governing group is undead. They've had decades or centuries to build up plots and establish subtle corruption. When you've had power for that long, you start to get creative about how you use it. Perhaps it was a tactical error on my part. But there is a level of stability in knowing who you're dealing with and their tricks. At the very least, I have a good idea of what they've been up to while I was away. The king lowered his voice. And that's why you make the royals nervous. They don't know what sort of thing you'll get up to, or what strength the alliances you inherited carry. They might not show it, but they're fond of you. Just keep building on that base, and you'll have a strong future here in Signia. Chapter 640. How to Get Them Out. With dinner finished, the Necromancer King began making the rounds, doing his farewells before leaving. That seemed to be a cue for the other kings. They were all staying because the others were all staying, and they didn't want to miss out on any important meetings or discussions because they had departed early. However, they all had important affairs to get back to. So, the Necromancer King's departure led to plans for a mass exodus, starting the next morning. They would be taking the armies with them, which would involve dozens of airships, leaving over the course of only a few hours. Then, there were the body doubles to impersonate the royals, hiding the fact that they were actually going home by portal. The mages of the Duskblade sect would set up a relay for them to get back home with, other than the Necromancer King, who had the personal power to get himself all the way home in one hop. He was actually the furthest from home, and could realistically send everyone else home without an issue. But he was also a king, and it would be unbearable for the others to ask the favor of him. They would rather ask the Duskblade sect to do it for them than to ask a favor of another king. And he knew it. He also wouldn't let them live it down. If they had a subordinate do it for them, that was normal for a king. But asking another king to do something for you was like admitting that you were incapable. Unacceptable, especially if it was true. To Dominic, the news that everyone would be heading out in the morning was a massive relief. Sure, it was a chaotic morning getting everyone moved, but it was also an excellent opportunity for them to take some time to meet the people of the duchy without the royals and their demands taking up all their free time. There was so much more to do when they had guests in the manor, and for the first time in over a month, they would only have a handful of emissaries, and even those would soon be moving from the guest houses to the newly built Alliance Bank building. A building that Dominic was still not happy about, but mostly because it didn't match with anything else. But he could hold off for a little while and then find a good reason to renovate. There was no doubt that the first renovation of that building would be to at least change the roof style to match the rest of the compound, so that enemies outside the walls wouldn't be able to clearly see that it was marked as an important location. Alright, how are we going to arrange this? If we need to keep anyone from noticing that something big is happening, should we have the mages go to their rooms to open the first portals? Or would that attract too much attention? Dominic asked as he finished his evening in the office with Alexis and his advisors. Alistair shrugged. There is a protocol for this. Normally, you would disguise the body double and the mage as servants, as nobody counts servants going in and out. Then, the mage can open the portal from their room and send them off. However, in this case, we've got to do it at least 5 times, and that would be incredibly suspicious if you did it repeatedly. So, the best option is likely to gather them all somewhere private and send them off from there. Don't forget that the manor has portal restrictions on it now, so they will have to exit the compound. Dominic nodded. How about the lounge at the airship docks? That will give them the chance to wave goodbye to everyone as they pass. One final chance to greet the knights before they leave. Though, if they're going to do that, then leaving throughout the day would be better. Nobody would ask questions if they left early, and we could send them off from the arena one at a time, or in small groups. Then, the knights see that they did come to watch the first round, not just the preliminaries, and it should be an easier transition to not seeing them for the rest of the tournament. Alexis shrugged. Don't forget that not everyone is leaving. The kings are leaving, but the princes are not. Claudius will have to be forcibly extracted by Dave if he's not leaving with Eleanor, and Russell is staying here anyhow. Prince Fahad is also remaining here from what I gathered. He wants to watch the whole tournament, and Uncle George will remain to represent Midfield. I don't know who will be remaining from West Kyria, but they will definitely have someone in the box.
Right.
I almost forgot that we weren't going to have the house to ourselves for a while. I guess that I'll have to refrain from roaming the halls in my underpants. Jack made a strangled noise as he suppressed a laugh. There was never going to be a moment where the house of a provincial governor was so empty that he could roam the halls with impunity. Even if it was just the staff and his advisors, there would always be someone around and watching for the first sign of weakness or gossip that could be passed along for political advantage. That was likely why the king had chosen this particular group of advisors. They were far less likely to gossip than the others, and they were already considered somewhat misfits among the royal palace nobility, so none of them had the sort of close ties that would lead to them being pressured for information constantly. Intermittently, but not constantly. So, why don't we gather everyone tomorrow for breakfast, pass along the word, and then we will send them out one at a time. Their soldiers can leave later in the evening, as they'll take days or weeks to get home by airship anyhow. Dominic decided. That works for us. We will make sure that it happens. Alistair agreed. He would be one of the mages escorting them out anyhow. It was either he did it or Amy did it. Either way, it would attract attention, but he was newly arrived and less closely tied to the duchy, so they might assume that it was more to do with the king's business. An easy deception to explain why they were not coming back right away.